Hello, welcome to another sprint demo from the Evernym team that contributes to Hyperledger and Sovrin projects. This week so I should start off by apologizing, especially to the team. We recorded a demo 2 weeks ago and it's sitting on my laptop and I'm gonna get it to YouTube today along with this demo. So people will be able to enjoy that. So if you haven't seen the last demo, there should be 2 new demos for you to look at if you're watching this one. So I do appreciate all the efforts the team puts together to do these demos. I think it's good guidance on, it helps me a lot to understand what happened, and I think it helps a lot with external collaboration with other contributors in these projects. So today we're gonna talk about the work we did in this sprint. Our main focus on the node side, we're continuing our efforts on PBFT view change. We are going to talk a lot more about those in a couple of weeks because they're getting close to being where we can share more public. You can obviously look at master and see what happened, but they're almost to the point where there's completed work to show. Besides that, it was a lot of polish. There was some improvements we made to the way the transaction author agreement works, to the some bug fixes, to the way that public right access works, to the way that endorsers and authors interact. So we improved a lot of those kind of things. Not necessarily bugs in the product, but requirements, bugs, or improvements to polish on the way that the features work in practice. So that's been really useful. I appreciate the work the team did on that. So we're gonna, and we did a release. The release is coming really soon here now. We're in the final stages of testing there. On the Indy SDK side, we're also getting a new release of the SDK out, and we demoed 2 weeks ago tab completion in the CLI. We discussed some improvements based on that demo. You'll see those improvements in the way that history works, or the tab completion works, and the history works, the shell history. We also did some bug fixes, and we've been working on support for the latest Ubuntu, so we'll give an update on that. That's coming soon. I know people have been excited for us to support this year's Ubuntu LTS. So that's the main items there. And on the Sovrin token side of development, we talked previously about our support for being able to manage the UTXO, the active UTXO transactions. We talked about that in the last sprint demo. We finished up some of that. We finished up the way give fees work and got a release out. We've also been working on some helper scripts to help people that are managing large wallets or large amounts of tokens and the distribution process. So if that ever gets approved, we'll have a clear process for doing that in a secure way. And that's the summary of what we've been working on. So with that, I'll stop sharing my screen. I'll let Artem take over and share the improvements he made in the SDK for the way transaction endorsers work. Then we'll have Alex share with us the fix to, I poorly communicated requirements and public right access wasn't working the way we expected. So Lynn Benedictson at the foundation realized that and we were able to get it corrected. And then Vladimir will talk about the new releases. So that's the plan for today. So you can share your screen, Artem.
Yeah. Hello, everyone. So my demo is about transaction endorsement. Let's consider a situation when I'm an author transaction. I would like to post, for example, a schema to Ledger, but I don't want to accept some limitation or requirements of Ledger, like transaction agreements or payments or something else. But I have some relationships with someone who can endorse my transaction and submit to the ledger. So we added a new type of functionality. From the Indy point of view, we added just one new function. This function calls Indy append request endorser. It's a very simple function that just append the endorser field to a request. But this function appends some limitation for overflow, how this request should be used. And now I would like to show a simple demo a simple demo script. I've written this sample on Python. Also, this sample use last libindy stable version. And in this demo, I have three actors, and one person is the author who would like to publish a transaction to the ledger schema transaction to the ledger with preserving him as the author of this schema. The second author is endorser who will publish that, and then also I have a trustee just for getting the IDs for author and endorser on the ledger. So here has some typical preparation steps like connecting to the pool, opening wallets, and getting the IDs. And next, the more important steps here has preparation and sending transaction to the ledger. Let's start my program. This program will pass on building schema request. This is the first step. I mentioned we have a schema transaction. Here I need to move to next step. I need to look at the author transaction, and here we can find schema transaction. Yeah, here's our original schema request. Next, I have to call new libindy function to append endorser to this transaction. Here I pass an original request and endorser the ID. We have appended. Let's look at request again. And here we can find new endorser field. This field corresponds to another actor. Next, here important moment, both original transaction author and endorser should sign the transactions. So here I have two steps calling multi-sign request function. For the first step, we can call like a multi-sign function, like a typical sign function, but appending the second signature, it's obligatory to call multi-sign to get both signatures of author and endorser. And so let's move to the next step. Let's look. Now we have one signature from original author, and go next. Move. So I can understand where I am with it now. Let's look it's on request. We have signatures. Now I would like to submit this request to ledger. Schema, we done preparation. All. Yes. Just send it. So here we can see that request has been successfully sent to the ledger. Here our response. We can see here that I just like to move to separate screen better thing. So if we look at response, we can find endorser field, and also we can find this different field, this transaction author. I'd like to find it, data here, and from. So the fields are different. It means that the original author will be our first person without any role on ledger, but endorser for this transaction will be different. Let's go further. Check that the schema actually has been written. Yes, we get schema response. It contains data. So that's it, I believe. I would like to note that endorsing keeps in request, a later network administrator can find who actually sent this transaction and should be charged in case of fees are set on ledger. So that's it. Thank you.
This is a very highly requested feature. The Sovereign Governance Framework version 2 allows introduces the concept of endorsers being separate from authors, but the ledger didn't support that until now, so thank you for that. So to be clear, an author says the endorser has the relationship with the foundation to be able to pay for rights. There's no other payment system on the network now, and we need to ensure that people can't spam the ledger, things like that. And so the endorser has a billing relationship with the network governance with the foundation, and then who's executing that governance. And then the author doesn't need that relationship, but the author needs to identify who the endorser is in advance so that they can include that DID of the endorser before they sign the transaction. If they decide to change the endorser, they have to regenerate the transaction, which I think works really well. Now, Artem, there's an endorser field and an author field. As I was going through this yesterday with Lynn at the foundation, he asked, can you have, the endorser field's optional because you might have an author without an endorser. Can you have an endorser without an author? Can you leave the author field blank? Or does
the author should sign an endorser field in addition, like a whole transaction. It's obligatory to have both fields in this case.
Excellent. That's what we expected, but wanted to confirm. Very good. Thank you for that. Any other questions anybody has? Okay, we'll move on to the very brief pause. We'll move on to the next item. So, Alex.
Yeah. Hello, everyone. Let me share my screen. Okay, so I'm going to tell about one of recent improvements. Can be considered as either a new feature or a fix about being able to create new DIDs without endorsers. So let's start with a use case. So this is more or less Sovrin specific use case, and this is about a user who doesn't have an endorser role. He would like to create a new public DID on the ledger, paying in tokens. So just remind, of course, how the authentication defining what users can create a new DID. It's described in terms of auth rules. And of course, the default auth rule in Indy node is that only endorsers can create new DIDs. So a user must have an endorser role to be able to create. This is the left arrow. Sovrin network, since it supports some payments, it's going to extend this rule to allow non-endorser users to create new DIDs and pay in tokens. And this particular use case is the user, for example, Alice, who would like to create a new DID. It may even not have any DID on the ledger. Because endorser, of course, it has a role on the ledger. Endorser, it has a DID on the ledger. But Alice, she doesn't have any DID on the ledger. She would like just to pay in tokens and create a new DID for herself, for example. And this DID can be further used for creation of credential definitions, schema, and so on. Okay, so how it's related to signature? The current assumption in Indy node and Sovrin that every transaction must be signed. And of course, the ledger must be able to verify the signature. So the question for the ledger is how it can do this. What public keys the ledger should use for this verification. For this new use case, in the case where Alice doesn't have a DID on the ledger, we answer this question that Alice must sign that transaction by the public key associated with the newly created DID. So Alice creates a new DID. She creates a new public key, where key associated with the DID, and she signs the transaction by this newly created DID. So this is how it should look from this use case point of view. The current behavior by the endorser is that it signs the transaction by the existing DID on the ledger that the endorser has. So why it didn't work before the fix? As I said, every transaction to the main ledger must be signed. And the only way how the ledger was able to verify the transaction, the signatures, to find the public key, is to ledger. That is DID and the corresponding public key must be present on the ledger. And in this case, Alice doesn't have a DID on the ledger. That's why signature verification failed before the fix. By the way, important thing that the exception for the described situation is a Xfer transaction in Sovrin plugins, because it's not signed by a DID on the ledger. It's signed by a payment address, which is a cryptonym actually. So it's his in this case address is equal to the public key. So the ledger can get the public key just from the transaction, since this is a payment address. Okay, so how it's all related to the auth rules? Although it's possible to set an auth constraint to require zero signatures, and by the way, it's done for transfer payment transaction. The general assumption, as we have seen on the previous slide, is that all domain transactions must be signed by at least one valid signature, and all the signatures must be created against the DID present on the ledger. So even if you specify this rule that we support any role with one signature, yeah, so the signature is required. And even if it was zero, we still get an error from the ledger because at least one signature must be there. So what has been changed, what has been fixed? There are two things. The first thing that has been changed is signature verification. We didn't remove the assumption that every domain transaction must be signed. So this is still true. But what has been changed is how the signature verification is performed. And now we allow signing by a newly created DID, as was described here. Sorry, as was described here. So we can sign the transaction by the newly created DID. So now this verification of signature has been changed. So no NIM transaction still must be signed by a DID present on the ledger, but for a new NIM transaction, we allow signing against a newly created DID and the ver key. Of course, there are checks that the newly created DID really associated with the ver key. The second thing that has been changed is related to the auth constraint. Although now we accept off-ledger signatures in case of new DID creation, network administrators may want to configure whether it's allowed to use such signatures for the action of creation of new DID and other potential actions or not. That's why it was decided that these checks are done explicitly. So a new flag called off-ledger signature was added to auth constraint to specify if valid signatures created against the keys which are not present on the ledger are accepted during verification of required number of signatures. This flag is optional and it falls by default. Examples when network administrator may want to set this flag to true is the use case that we just considered, creation of a new DID in a permissionless mode. Another possible example is signing by cryptonyms. We don't support it for now, but if there are some requirements for this, it can be easily done.
What do you mean by a cryptonym?
This is when the DID is equal to public key. So we have just an identifier, and this identifier is actually a public key. This is like in payment address.
Thanks.
Because for the ledger, the main thing in order to verify the signature, it needs to find the public key. So the main way how the ledger does this, it finds a ver key associated with the DID, or in other words, it just gets a DID dog. The second possible option in case of new DID creation, it can get the new the newly created key. And the third option is to use a cryptonym. That is, the user explicitly says, I signed this by this public key. Okay, so this is an example of the new hours constraint to add a new DID in permissionless way. So you can say this is hours constraint or. So we would like to allow creation of a new DID either by one endorser, one user who has a DID on the ledger and has an endorser role, or we would like to allow anyone with any role to create a new DID if he or she pays in tokens. And we still require one signature, and we do support off-ledger signature. This is a new flag, off-ledger signature equal to true. So in case of Sovrin default rules, I would expect that this how it will look like. If for some reasons the network administrator doesn't want to be able to create new DIDs by DIDs not present on the ledger, this flag can be set to false. Okay, so this was implemented in both Indy node and Indy SDK. This is a number of tests showing this behavior. You can see that all the tests pass. Let's just quickly go through these. The first test is about, well, as I said before, the default rule for creation of new DID on Indy node, not on Sovrin, but on Indy node, is that only endorsers, only users with endorser role can create them. And if you try without any changes to create a new DID by a user who doesn't have any DID on the ledger, it will be rejected. In the next test, we change the hours constraint for the action of creation of a new DID, saying that any role with off-ledger signature can do this. And in this case, with the new fixes that we did, the creation succeeded. So, of course, now I also check a couple of edge cases. In order to make it happen, the where key must be present, must be specified, because the ledger needs a where key to verify the signature against, because we still require one signature. Also, we require that the destinations, the new DID should be properly created and performed, and so on. So, I believe that's it.
Thank you. It's excellent to see step by step us getting closer to the vision of the Sovrin network, which is fully decentralized public utility for identity with strong governance, democratic governance, and with the allowing transaction authors to have endorsers if they handle payment for them, and be able to have public write access through permissionless write access if you attach some kind of payment token. Those are key steps in that direction. So that's really valuable. It's exciting times. Now Vladimir is going to give us an update on the release process.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yep.
I just want to say about main changes and additions that were made in...
Excuse me, Vladimir, are you going to share your screen?
Yes. So we have on the Indy node and Sovrin side major changes, as new DIDs can be created without endorsers that was described previously. Transaction authors don't need to be endorsers now to just build transaction and submitting to ledger can be performed with endorser. Also, we now our TA acceptance mechanism should use date and not exact time, not exact timestamp. And also some bug fixes were performed. That were connected with incorrect request validation and some ZMQ issues that were found during previous testing. Also, some work were performed on the CD pipeline side and in system tests. And also, there are many SDK changes on the SDK side in libindy and libsoft token. So we have a hotfix of get UTXO request, and now it has a limit limit for UTXOs that returned from the request, and also it this request now use pagination, so we are able to return all unspent UTXOs from some with some shift. It is implemented as from parameter for this request, and also we have an addition that we can make state proof verification for this type of request. So most of the changes on the libsoft token side were connected to our get UTXO request. And also there are libindy changes. So now we have a couple of new transactions in Indy CLI that are sign and verify address. And also there are some VCX changes. Also, all changes that were performed on the Indy node side that connected with the Ledger signatures are also supported on the libindy side. So I believe that's all from me.
Excellent, thank you for that. The work to be able to sign with payment address was a partnership. It was initially submitted by Mike at the Sovrin Foundation, and we were able to assist on that. So that's going to be nice, simplify the process of exchanging payment addresses between users of the network. And the other useful addition is libvcx has some changes that remove the dependency on the Evernym agency. That was submitted by Doug on the Evernym team. And what's nice about that is that the Sovrin connector app in the Sovrin Foundation GitHub that was released about in December of last year hasn't received much attention because it was too tightly tied to the Evernym agency. And with a little bit of work, that could be removed now, and it could probably be made to work with the Aries Cloud Agent Python, the Akapi that was contributed by the government of British Columbia. So if somebody wants to look at that, this is a good time to look at that. Looking at what's coming up really briefly on the, we're going to largely take a break from working on the Sovrin token side of things. That's looking pretty good now, and we're going to take a break on there. On the Indy node side, we want to be very focused on PBFT view change so we can get it done in September. We're going to make a lot of progress there. We might be able to pick up one or two other items, but our main focus is PBFT view change. On the SDK side, we're going to start looking at, we want to get some new documentation out as we look at the splits, the evolution to Aries. A lot of the SDK is going to move to Aries, and what's left is going to be the Indy resolver. It's going to be very specific to the Indy ledger. But the wallet and pack unpack and some of these helper items are going to move into Aries. So we want to get the documentation for the current SDK published. We want to improve it so it can feed into that conversation about architecture. And we're going to start working on fully qualified DID support. We need to figure out the architecture there. And we have some cleanup, some polish work to do. So that's the main goal there. With that, we're out of time. Brent, thanks for joining. Do you have any questions? Oh, Brent already dropped. So we're out of time. Thank you for everybody who did a demo and all the work that went on these last 2 weeks. If anybody who watches this video has questions, you can find us at #Indy on chat.hyperledger.org. That's a Rocket Chat instance. And of course, you can also interact with us by raising your issue and commenting on the issues we're working on. So thank you, everybody. Also in wiki.hyperledger.org, there's a list of meetings that are useful. There's an Indy maintainers meeting every other Monday, and there's we participate in a lot of the Aries working group calls that happen on Wednesdays, as well as the identity working group calls that happen on Wednesdays and Thursdays. So those are good ways to collaborate with us. So thank you very much.